A family of four vanished during a mountain expedition, initially presumed victims of a tragic hiking accident. However, 3 weeks later, a wildlife camera captures something utterly startling, compelling everyone to question what truly transpired, revealing a truth far more sinister than anyone could have ever conceived. The wind howled across Glacier National Park, Montana, carrying with it the biting promise of another incoming cold front. Eleanor Whitaker, known affectionately to most as Ellie, stepped carefully off the gondola, her well-worn hiking boots crunching firmly against the snow-packed trail. At 67, her steps were measured yet confident, displaying the assured gait of someone who had intimately traversed these formidable mountains for decades. Her eyes, still remarkably sharp despite the passage of years, scanned the foggy mountain path stretching ahead. The visibility was poor, dangerously limited, but that didn't particularly concern her. She knew these intricate trails better than most. She had walked them, taught vital survival skills on them, and rescued numerous people from their treacherous slopes for over 30 challenging years as both a park ranger and a dedicated wilderness survival instructor. Adjusting the familiar weight of her backpack, she made her way purposefully toward the rustic cabin-style lodge that served as a crucial waypoint for weary hikers. Its sturdy wooden structure standing resolute against the vast mountainside, smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. As she dropped her heavy pack onto the floor in the foyer, stamping accumulated snow vigorously from her boots, a familiar face looked up expectantly from behind the worn counter. "Miss Whitaker." The local clerk's face brightened considerably with recognition. "Didn't expect to see you back up here quite so soon." "Hello, Thomas," Ellie acknowledged formally, her voice carrying the undeniable weight of her solemn purpose. Thomas leaned forward conspiratorially, lowering his voice significantly. "Any news at all about your family?" Ellie slowly shook her head, the lines of worry deepening noticeably around her tired eyes. To most visitors, she was simply Eleanor the Old Ranger, a living legend among the park staff and the regular hikers who frequented these peaks. Her well-earned reputation for leading popular women's survival retreats in her retirement had only further enhanced the profound respect she'd garnered during her 3 long decades of dedicated service. "Not yet," she replied softly, unzipping her heavy winter coat. "That's precisely why I'm back." Thomas nodded gravely, his expression solemn. Everyone in the small mountain town knew about the heartbreaking Whitaker family tragedy. Michael, Ellie's beloved son, along with his wife Sarah, and their young twin girls, Emily and Chloe, had been missing for nearly a full month now. What had initially started as a completely routine weekend hike had tragically turned into every family's absolute worst nightmare. Ellie carefully pulled out a thick stack of missing person posters from her pack. The top one prominently showed a smiling, happy family of 4. Michael in his favorite stocky green hoodie, Sarah radiating warmth with her infectious smile, and the twins, Emily dressed in bright, cheerful yellow and Chloe in soft purple, their matching grins revealing identical gaps where baby teeth had recently fallen out. "I was hoping to put these up around the place. Replace the older, faded ones," she said quietly, holding the stack out slightly, gesturing towards the lodge and the main trailheads. "Of course," Thomas replied without a moment's hesitation, his tone full of empathy, "anything at all to help." "The manager already approved it. He said to tell you if there's anything else we can possibly do, just ask." "Thank you," Ellie said sincerely, genuinely grateful for the consistent kindness that had been shown to her throughout this incredibly difficult ordeal. As she moved methodically through the lodge, pinning fresh posters carefully to bulletin boards and near prominent entrances, Ellie couldn't help but mentally replay the specific events of that fateful day in her mind. It had been a completely typical Saturday morning when Michael called, cheerfully inviting her to join their family hike. "Come on, Mom," he'd urged, his voice characteristically playful over the phone line. "The girls have been asking for their Grandma Ellie adventure stories all week long." She desperately wanted to go, had almost canceled her other existing plans, but the important charity event she'd firmly committed to attending months before simply couldn't be rescheduled. It was a crucial fundraiser for wilderness education programs aimed at underprivileged youth, a cause incredibly close to her heart. Next time, she'd promised him sincerely, "Take lots of wonderful pictures for me." And they had. Midday, just as she was busy setting up displays at the bustling charity event, her phone had buzzed insistently with a new message notification from Michael. It was a perfect family portrait, the four of them smiling broadly, happily posing against the majestic backdrop of the snow-capped mountains. She'd smiled fondly, noting with a pang how they'd taken it at the exact same picturesque spot as always. Sarah had mentioned once, quite casually, that she wanted to create a sort of time-lapse sequence, beautifully showing how the girls grew up year after year against the seemingly unchanging, timeless mountains. It had seemed like such a sweet, incredibly sentimental idea at the time. Hours later, when the successful charity event had finally wrapped up and Ellie returned exhausted to her quiet home, she noticed several missed calls from Michael. There was a brief text message, too. "Weather turning bad up here. Cutting the hike short. Talk later." She tried calling him back immediately, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach, but the call went straight to his voicemail. Sarah's phone did precisely the same. At first, Ellie had sternly told herself not to worry excessively. Cell service was notoriously spotty and unreliable in certain remote parts of the vast park. But when evening descended ominously and they still hadn't returned home as expected, the initial worry rapidly solidified into a chilling, palpable fear. That very night, she'd anxiously called the police. By the next morning, official search parties were already meticulously combing the most frequently used hiking trails. Volunteers from the tight-knit local community showed up in supportive droves, many among them clearly remembering Michael from when he was just a young boy, eagerly trailing after his capable ranger mother on the safer, well-maintained paths. After a full week of intense, exhaustive searching, with helicopters scanning relentlessly from above and numerous teams on foot meticulously covering ground below, the police had begun to gently voice what Ellie staunchly refused to accept. The likelihood of finding them alive was steadily, grimly diminishing with each passing day. Ms. Whitaker, the weary search coordinator, had said gently, his voice laced with professional sympathy, "We've thoroughly covered every likely area at this point. With the volatile weather systems that consistently move through these mountains, I'm truly sorry, but we realistically have to consider the strong possibility of a tragic accident." But Ellie knew her son implicitly. Michael was exceptionally experienced in these challenging mountains, having grown up deeply respecting their inherent dangers. He would never, under any circumstances, have knowingly put his precious family at significant risk. He would have meticulously read the telltale weather signs, would have promptly sought adequate shelter, or prudently turned back long before things became truly dangerous. Something else, something unforeseen and sinister, must have happened, something far beyond a simple, unfortunate hiking accident, which is precisely why, despite the police significantly scaling back their official search efforts, Ellie had resolutely returned to the imposing mountain. If no one else was willing or able to find her missing family, she would determinately do it herself. As she stepped back outside into the frigid air to post more flyers along the key trailheads, her fingers quickly stiffened uncomfortably in the biting cold. She secured each poster carefully, diligently making sure they wouldn't be easily torn away by the relentless, gusting wind. With each one she fastened, she thought painfully of Michael's last happy photo. The entire family smiling broadly, completely unaware of the terrible fate that lay just ahead. A young, bundled-up couple walked past slowly, their curious gazes lingering momentarily on the stark missing person poster before moving sympathetically to Ellie's recognizable face, their expressions filled with a mixture of recognition and profound pity. She'd grown somewhat accustomed to those sorrowful looks over the past agonizing weeks, but pity wouldn't find her family. Unwavering determination absolutely would. With the poster securely placed at the main trailhead, Ellie stared intently up at the vast, formidable mountain, its towering peak currently obscured ominously by thick, swirling clouds. Somewhere up there, concealed within that rugged wilderness, the answer she desperately sought awaited her discovery, and she would relentlessly find them, no matter the cost, no matter the obstacles. Ellie continued her methodical, determined posting of the missing person flyers along the winding hiking trail, patiently stopping hikers as they passed to inquire gently if they'd seen her family. Each brief conversation followed the same disheartening pattern. Sympathetic, sorrowful eyes, slow shaking heads, mumbled, well-intentioned hopes for a miraculous happy ending. After the 20th consecutive "no, sorry," Ellie had almost resigned herself reluctantly to another long day filled entirely with crushing disappointment. Then, just as she was carefully securing a flyer to a wooden trail marker about 2 miles up the increasingly steep path, a figure suddenly emerged from between the dense trees to her right. A man, appearing to be in his late 50s, dressed head to toe in practical camouflage gear with a bright orange safety vest prominently displayed, approached her with noticeably purposeful strides. "Excuse me," he called out clearly, his warm breath visible as condensation in the frigid mountain air. "Mind if I take one of those?" Ellie turned slowly, studying him intently. He had the distinctively weathered look of someone who undoubtedly spent far more time outdoors than indoors. A thick, substantial beard heavily peppered with gray, and keen, alert eyes that seemed to meticulously catalog everything around him with practiced ease. "Of course," she replied readily, handing him a crisp flyer. "Name's Caleb Jennings," he said matter-of-factly, extending a thick, gloved hand towards her. "Local hunter. Been coming up to these mountains regularly for about 30 years now." Ellie shook his offered hand firmly. "Eleanor Whitaker. Friend, just call me Ellie." Recognition instantly flashed in his observant eyes. "Ah, the ranger. Heard a lot about you over the years. Greatly respect what you've done for this park." Caleb studied the flyer intently for a long moment, his brow furrowing in concentration. "When did you say they went missing exactly?" 3 weeks ago," Ellie confirmed softly. "Almost a full month now." Caleb reached thoughtfully into his sturdy jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sophisticated electronic device. I think maybe I should check something. I've got several trail cameras set up around here, mostly for tracking game movements." Ellie's pulse immediately quickened with a surge of unexpected hope. You think you might have possibly caught something?" "Maybe," Caleb conceded cautiously. "Definitely worth looking into." He expertly manipulated the device's small screen, scrolling rapidly through what appeared to be a long series of still photos and short video clips. His movements gradually became slower, more deliberate, as he focused intently on particular segments of the recorded footage. "What is it?" Ellie asked anxiously, unable to contain her rising hope any longer. "Did you see something?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. Instead, he continued carefully reviewing the footage, occasionally glancing critically between the device's screen and the missing person flyer held firmly in his other hand. Then, abruptly, he stopped, his index finger hovering pointedly over the display. "Miss Whitaker," he said gravely, his voice low, "I think you really should see this." He turned the device carefully toward her. The recorded footage was grainy, somewhat indistinct, the surrounding forest shrouded mysteriously in a thick, ethereal mist, but Ellie's heart nearly stopped beating altogether when 3 familiar figures slowly moved across the camera's frame. A woman with distinctive shoulder-length hair and 2 small children, all moving with evident, cautious urgency through the dense underbrush. The woman wore a light-colored jacket, perhaps coral or pale pink, while the children were dressed distinctly in bright yellow and soft lavender outfits. "That's them," Ellie whispered, her voice catching uncontrollably in her throat. "That's Sarah and the twins." Caleb nodded solemnly, his expression turning increasingly grave. "I thought it might be." Now, look closely at the timestamp. The date clearly displayed in the corner of the screen showed that the crucial footage had been captured just 3 short days ago. 3 days! Ellie's voice rose sharply with a potent mixture of disbelief and powerfully renewed hope. "They're alive. But where's Michael? My son should definitely be with them." Caleb zoomed, in carefully as much as the limited footage quality would allow. "This is a fixed-position camera," he explained patiently. "It only captures whatever passes directly in front of its lens. Your son could easily have been walking just behind them, out of frame, or perhaps he might have taken a slightly different route through the trees. There's simply no way to tell definitively from just this short clip." Ellie stared intently at the frozen image, visually drinking in the precious sight of her family. They looked utterly worn out and visibly shaken, moving with the distinctly cautious, hesitant steps of those navigating completely unfamiliar, potentially dangerous terrain. At one brief point, they had turned slightly towards the hidden camera but didn't seem to notice its presence at all, likely because it was well hidden for its intended purpose of tracking wildlife undetected. "Where exactly was this taken?" Ellie asked urgently, a desperate edge creeping in her voice. Caleb pulled up a detailed GPS map display on his device. "Right here," he indicated, pointing precisely to a clearly marked location on the digital map. "It's deep within the northern section of the park, about 8 miles or so from where we're standing right now. The terrain gets incredibly rough up there, lots of unmarked, hidden ravines, dangerously unstable slopes, especially after the recent snowfalls." Ellie studied the map intently, a chilling realization slowly dawning upon her. That's completely outside the designated search zone. The police had never ventured that far north primarily because they had explicitly stated it was far too dangerous. No maintained trails, extremely high avalanche risk, particularly after the significant storms they had recently experienced. "Exactly," Caleb confirmed grimly. "Not typically somewhere a family with young children would ever intentionally venture, which is precisely why no one ever thought to look for them there." "Caleb," Ellie concluded decisively, her mind racing, "I absolutely need a copy of this footage immediately. I need to show it to the police right away." Caleb nodded readily, already working swiftly on transferring the vital digital file. "I can email it directly to you right now. And here," he added, quickly scribbling on a small notepad pulled from his pocket, "is my personal number. Call me anytime if you need anything else at all. I happen to know those northern reaches pretty well myself." "Thank you," Ellie said fervently, her voice thick with raw emotion. "This is truly the first real, tangible lead we've had in weeks." "I certainly hope it helps," Caleb replied sincerely, "and I truly hope you find them all safe and sound." As they finished the crucial file transfer, Caleb checked his wristwatch pointedly. "I really need to head back down now. It's getting late, and I've already got what I came up here for." He gestured vaguely towards his substantial hunting pack. "Will you be all right getting back?" "Yes," Ellie confirmed quickly, clutching her phone containing the precious, newly acquired footage tightly in her hand. "I'm going straight back to my cabin right now to call the police immediately." They walked back together towards the main lodge, the path noticeably easier to navigate going downhill. Ellie's mind raced uncontrollably with powerfully renewed possibilities. Her family was alive, or at least they had been as of just 3 days ago. The police would absolutely have to restart the official search now. They'd be compelled to look thoroughly in areas they had previously dismissed as too perilous. When they finally reached the edge of the lodge clearing, Caleb tipped his hat respectfully to her. "Remember, call if you need anything at all. Good luck, Miss Whitaker." "Thank you again, Caleb," Ellie replied sincerely, watching intently as he headed off towards the parking area. She turned sharply and hurried purposefully toward her rented cabin, newfound determination evident in every single step. For the very first time in weeks, she felt something potent stirring within her beyond the crushing weight of grief and utter desperation. She felt a flicker, a spark, of genuine hope. The very moment Ellie stepped inside her small, rented cabin, she immediately pulled out her phone and dialed the main police department number, her fingers trembling slightly as she navigated quickly to the saved contact information for Detective Marshall, the lead investigating officer assigned to her family's baffling case. "Detective Marshall speaking," came the prompt, professional answer after just a couple of rings. "This is Eleanor Whitaker," she said clearly. consciously trying to keep her voice steady and controlled despite the surge of adrenaline. I found evidence. I believe I found evidence that my family is alive. There was a brief, pregnant pause on the line before the detective responded cautiously. What kind of evidence exactly, Miss Whitaker? Video footage, Ellie explained rapidly, from a hunter's trail camera. It clearly shows Sarah and the twins moving through the forest just 3 days ago. She quickly recounted her recent encounter with Caleb Jennings and detailed the specific location where the crucial footage had been captured. I'm sending you the video file right now, she continued urgently, pulling up her email application on her phone. You absolutely need to see this, detective. We need to restart the search immediately, without any delay. As Detective Marshall presumably reviewed the footage on his end, Ellie paced restlessly around the small, confined cabin, glancing occasionally and anxiously out the window where the precious daylight was already beginning to rapidly fade. It was nearly 4 p.m., and at this time of year in the high mountains, darkness fell incredibly quickly. This does indeed appear to be your daughter-in-law and granddaughters, Marshall finally conceded after a long, tense moment of silence. However, Miss Whitaker, we simply cannot realistically begin a full-scale search operation this late in the day. What do you mean? Ellie demanded incredulously, her frustration mounting. They're out there right now, possibly injured, certainly cold and frightened. I completely understand your urgency, believe me, Marshall replied, his tone carefully measured and professional. But as a former experienced park ranger yourself, you know better than anyone the inherent dangers of conducting nighttime search operations in this extremely challenging terrain. The specific area you're describing is known to be particularly treacherous. Ellie moved closer to the window, watching intently as other park rangers were already guiding the last remaining day hikers back down the darkening mountain trails. Dark, heavy clouds were rapidly gathering ominously above the towering peaks, promising yet more snowfall soon. The official weather forecast is calling for another significant snowfall tonight, Marshall continued pragmatically. We simply cannot risk sending multiple search teams into completely unmarked, potentially hazardous territory with severely limited visibility and rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. We'd only be creating more potential victims, adding to the tragedy. As much as it pained her deeply to admit it, Ellie knew instinctively that he was absolutely right. She had personally conducted enough perilous rescue operations herself over the years to fully understand the established protocols and the sound reasoning behind them. What about helicopters? She asked desperately, grasping at any possible alternative. Could they perhaps fly over the area? Not in these current conditions, and certainly not safely at night, Marshall replied firmly. Additionally, from what I can discern in this grainy footage, they don't appear to be in immediate, critical distress. They seem to be moving purposefully, deliberately, not like people who are critically injured or completely lost and disoriented. Ellie sank heavily into a nearby chair, struggling intensely with the overwhelming frustration of knowing her precious family was potentially so close, yet still agonizingly unreachable. So we just wait? Wait until morning. First light, Marshall confirmed definitively. I'll coordinate immediately with the park authorities tonight. We'll assemble experienced teams and meticulously plan the safest possible approach to that specific area first thing tomorrow. Miss Whitaker, I promise you, we will do absolutely everything possible within our power to find them tomorrow. I understand, she said reluctantly, the words tasting bitter, but I want to be part of this search team. Given your extensive experience and intimate knowledge of the park, I think that can certainly be arranged. Just be ready at the main ranger station by 6 a.m. sharp. After ending the difficult call, Ellie sat in heavy silence for several long minutes, staring intently at the frozen image of Sarah and the twins still displayed on her phone screen. They were alive, miraculously alive, but still, something felt fundamentally wrong, unsettling. Where was Michael? Why hadn't he been with them? Clearly visible on the camera footage. Caleb's logical explanation, that Michael might simply have been out of frame or perhaps taking a slightly different, parallel route, made perfect logical sense on the surface, but Ellie knew her son implicitly. He would never, ever have intentionally separated from his family, especially not in such remote, demonstrably dangerous terrain, particularly with the young twins involved. He was far too protective, far too inherently cautious for such recklessness. And why were they even in that specific, perilous area to begin with? It was located far off the familiar trails they usually frequented, situated within a zone widely known to be hazardous even for highly experienced hikers. Michael simply wouldn't have knowingly led his family there without some incredibly compelling, overriding reason. The unanswered questions multiplied rapidly in her mind, offering no concrete answers, only serving to significantly deepen her gnawing concern and unease. Ellie stood up abruptly and moved back towards the window again, watching silently as the very last vestiges of daylight faded completely from the darkening sky and the first delicate snowflakes began to softly fall outside. Somewhere up there, concealed within the rapidly growing darkness, her cherished family was facing yet another terrifying night alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. "Hold on," she whispered fiercely, her warm breath fogging the cold glass pane. "Just hold on tight until morning comes." As evening fully settled over the imposing mountain like a heavy shroud, Ellie's small cabin felt increasingly, oppressively claustrophobic. The sturdy wooden walls seemed to close in menacingly around her, and the profound silence within amplified the anxious, tumultuous thoughts whirling relentlessly through her mind. Despite the comforting warmth radiating generously from the small, crackling fireplace, a deep chill ran persistently through her that had absolutely nothing to do with the plummeting outside temperature. Her stomach growled loudly, abruptly reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything substantial since early breakfast that morning. Looking down at her watch, 6:30 p.m., Ellie made a quick decision. She decided to join the communal dinner being served in the lodge's spacious main hall. Being completely alone with her turbulent thoughts tonight would only serve to feed her already overwhelming anxiety. She bundled up thoroughly against the intensifying cold and made her way purposefully across the snow-covered courtyard towards the main lodge building. The snowfall had noticeably intensified now, large, heavy flakes drifting down lazily in the soft, ambient glow of the strategically placed outdoor lamps. The surrounding trails were completely deserted now. Every sensible hiker had wisely returned to the relative safety and warmth of the lodge hours ago. As she approached the lodge entrance, she could clearly see a small group of people gathered convivially around the large, imposing stone fireplace situated in the central hall. The indistinct sounds of casual conversation and the occasional burst of hearty laughter filtered softly through the thick glass doors. It all felt so painfully, jarringly normal. Just another typical evening unfolding in the mountains for most of these unsuspecting people, while her entire world remained terrifyingly upended and uncertain. Pushing determinately through the heavy front doors, Ellie immediately felt the welcome rush of comforting warmth and smelled the enticing aroma of hot food emanating from the kitchen. Heads turned curiously as she entered, conversations faltering momentarily before resuming quickly with a somewhat forced, awkward casualness. She'd grown reluctantly accustomed to being the unfortunate subject of hushed whispers and pitying glances over the past agonizing weeks. She poured herself a simple cup of hot water from the communal drink station and retrieved an instant noodle cup from her coat pocket. As she found an unoccupied seat near the edge of the main gathering, not quite fully part of it, but not completely separate either, she gradually became aware of two older men talking quietly nearby. They appeared to be roughly her age, perhaps slightly older, their voices lowered discreetly, but still clearly audible in the momentary lulls of a larger, ambient conversation. "Say, that's Eleanor Whitaker over there, isn't it?" one of them murmured, gesturing subtly with his chin. "The wealthy benefactor woman?" "Yeah, that's her," the other replied quietly. "What a terrible shame. Donates all that significant money to the Wilderness Education Foundation just last month, and now her whole family's gone missing up here." Karma can certainly be cruel sometimes. If it were my family missing, the first man continued pointedly, seemingly unaware or uncaring that Ellie could clearly hear every single word he uttered, I'd be out there searching for them right now. Storm be damned. Absolutely. 100%, the second man readily agreed. Well, the other man added, his tone not entirely unkindly. She's just a woman, after all, and she's apparently doing all this searching completely alone. Can't possibly be easy at her age, facing these conditions. Ellie stared blankly down into her steaming cup of noodles, the warm vapor rising gently to warm her face, which had gone completely rigid with fiercely suppressed emotion. The general conversations around her continued unabated, most people giving her respectful space, some nodding politely when they happened to catch her eye, but she couldn't focus properly on anything except those carelessly uttered words echoing persistently in her head. I'd be out there searching right now. Storm be damned. Would Michael wait patiently until morning if it were missing somewhere out on that treacherous mountain? The answer came instantly, unequivocally. No, absolutely not. He wouldn't rest for a single moment until he found her. With a surge of renewed, fierce resolve, Ellie quickly finished just enough of her simple meal to stave off the worst of her hunger pangs, then quietly slipped away unnoticed from the main gathering. No one seemed to pay her departure any particular attention as she made her way briskly back towards her solitary cabin. Once safely back inside, she moved with renewed purpose and efficiency. From her packed bags, she quickly pulled out her most trusted, reliable hiking gear, equipment that had seen her safely through countless challenging wilderness situations over the decades. Multiple thermal base layers, heavy-duty waterproof outer shell, reinforced insulated boots, and her old familiar search and rescue pack, still meticulously organized with essential emergency supplies, a comprehensive first aid kit, and various vital survival tools. She carefully checked her handheld GPS device, ensuring she had both online maps readily available and reliable offline backups fully loaded onto the device. Caleb's provided coordinates were already clearly marked as a waypoint. She packed extra batteries for all her electronics, several high-energy bars for sustenance, and her lightweight sleeping bag, specifically rated for sub-zero temperatures. As she worked methodically, a small, nagging voice of caution whispered insistently in the back of her mind that she was perhaps being reckless, even foolish. The police and experienced park rangers would undoubtedly be mounting a comprehensive search effort at first light. She was, after all, 67 years old, facing incredibly treacherous terrain in rapidly worsening weather conditions. But a stronger, more insistent voice, the ingrained voice of experience that had successfully guided her through 3 full decades of demanding wilderness rescue work, forcefully reminded her that every single hour mattered critically in survival situations. And if there was anyone alive who could potentially navigate these formidable mountains safely, even in such adverse conditions, it was undoubtedly her. With her essential pack securely fastened on her back, Ellie slipped quietly out of her cabin, carefully avoiding the main, well-lit paths where she might potentially be seen or questioned. The snow was falling much more heavily now, already accumulating significantly on the ground, making movement more difficult. She pulled her powerful headlamp from her pocket, but prudently kept it switched off for the time being, not wanting to inadvertently draw any undue attention as she moved stealthily past the other dimly lit guest cabins. Once she reached the designated trailhead leading north, she paused briefly to orient herself properly according to Caleb's provided GPS coordinates. She needed to head generally northwest, away from the relative safety of the maintained trails and deep into the less traveled, more dangerous wilderness area. It would undoubtedly be an extremely challenging hike, even in broad daylight. In the rapidly growing darkness and intensifying snowfall, it would severely test every single skill and ounce of endurance she possessed. But her family was out there, somewhere in that vast expanse, and she was absolutely going to find them. Ellie switched on her headlamp, casting a focused beam of light onto the snow-covered path ahead, took a deep, fortifying breath of the frigid mountain air, and resolutely began her arduous ascent. The fresh snow crunched loudly beneath her sturdy boots, her warm breath forming visible clouds in the freezing air with each exhalation. With every determined step she took, the faint sounds and lights of the distant lodge faded further behind her, gradually replaced entirely by the eerie whisper of falling snow and the mournful howl of the wind through the tall pine trees. The terrain grew progressively steeper, the indistinct path becoming less and less defined as she climbed higher. By the time she had been hiking steadily for a grueling 2 hours, the snow was falling so incredibly heavily that her visibility was drastically reduced to just a few precarious feet ahead. Time seemed to lose all tangible meaning as she relentlessly pushed forward, checking her GPS device frequently to ensure she stayed precisely on course towards the target coordinates. As the long hours slowly passed, the ambient temperature plummeted even further, well below freezing. The wind picked up significantly, driving the snow almost horizontally now, stinging painfully against any small area of exposed skin. Ellie's lips began to feel completely numb, her fingers stiffening inside her heavily insulated gloves despite their protection. The stark realization slowly dawned on her that she was rapidly approaching her physical limits. If the already severe conditions worsened even slightly further, she would have absolutely no choice but to find some form of temporary shelter and attempt to wait out the raging storm. Just as she was seriously considering her limited options for setting up a makeshift emergency camp, a faint, unexpected glow suddenly caught her eye through the thick, swirling curtain of falling snow. At first, she thought it might just be a trick of the dim light, or perhaps her own profound exhaustion playing cruel tricks on her weary mind. But as she moved cautiously forward, drawn towards the light, the faint glow gradually resolved itself in what appeared unmistakably to be a window. Warm light spilling invitingly from a small structure nestled discreetly among the surrounding trees. A cabin? Way out here, in this extremely remote section of the vast wilderness? Someone had actually built a cabin this far out. A powerful surge of hope coursed through Ellie's tired, aching body. If nothing else, it offered desperately needed shelter from the increasingly dangerous, life-threatening storm. And at best, just maybe, it might possibly hold the crucial answers she so desperately sought about her missing family. She approached the structure carefully, her headlamp beam illuminating a small, sturdy-looking building, partially protected from the elements by the dense surrounding pine trees. Thin smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney, confirming that someone was indeed inside. With hands trembling visibly, whether from the intense cold or nervous anticipation, she couldn't quite tell, Ellie firmly knocked on the solid wooden door. No response came from within. She knocked again, much louder this time, and called out clearly, "Hello? Is anyone there? Please, I desperately need help." Several long, agonizing moments passed in complete, unnerving silence. Then, just as she was about to knock forcefully a third time, the heavy door slowly creaked open. Ellie found herself staring directly into a face she had previously seen only in cherished photographs and stark missing person posters for the past 3 agonizing weeks. Sarah stood framed in the doorway, her expression completely frozen in utter, disbelieving shock. For a long heartbeat, neither woman moved, stunned into silence. Then, Sarah seemed to abruptly snap out of her stunned state and rushed forward anxiously, quickly pulling Ellie inside out of the raging storm. "Ellie, how? What on earth are you doing out here?" Sarah stammered incoherently, hastily helping her stunned mother-in-law shed her heavy, snow-covered outer layer. Before Ellie could even begin to respond, small, hesitant voices called out timidly from deeper within the dimly lit cabin. "Mom? Who is it?" 2 small figures peered nervously from behind a large wooden chair frame. Emily and Chloe, their wide eyes widening even further in disbelief as they instantly recognized their beloved grandmother. "Grandma Ellie!" they cried out simultaneously in relieved unison, rushing eagerly forward but stopping short abruptly, suddenly shy or perhaps uncertain after their long separation. Ellie sank heavily down to her knees, right there on the floor, completely overcome by a potent mixture of profound relief and sheer physical exhaustion. The intense warmth radiating from the cabin's small fire began to slowly thaw her frozen extremities, sending sharp, painful tingles shooting through her numb hands and feet. But the undeniable physical discomfort was absolutely nothing compared to the overwhelming flood of pure relief washing over her at finally seeing her precious granddaughters alive and seemingly unharmed. Sarah moved quickly towards the small kitchen area, returning moments later with a steaming mug. "Here, drink this quickly. You're practically half frozen." As Ellie gratefully sipped the warm liquid, reconstituted powdered milk, she realized with a slight grimace. Sarah gently ushered the twins back towards their makeshift bed in the corner. "It's very late now, girls. Back to bed immediately. Grandma Ellie is extremely tired and needs to warm up properly. You both can talk to her all you want tomorrow morning." Reluctantly, the twins shuffled obediently over to the small bed, curling up closely together beneath a single thick woolen blanket. Sarah handed them each a small cup of the warm milk, and after they eagerly gulped down the white liquid, she carefully tucked them in with practiced, maternal ease, murmuring something softly that drew quiet giggles before they finally settled down for the night. "Good night, Grandma Ellie," Emily said softly, her voice barely a whisper. Chloe echoed the words tiredly a moment later, already mid-yawn, her heavy eyes half closed. One of the girls drifted off almost immediately, which slightly surprised Ellie, given the circumstances. Soon after, their breathing evened out, soft and steady, rhythmic in the quiet cabin. The comforting warmth of the thick blanket and the reassuring presence of each other seemed to instantly dissolve the day's accumulated weariness, leaving them appearing peaceful and utterly still in their shared slumber. As the initial overwhelming shock gradually began to wear off, a torrent of urgent questions flooded Ellie's weary mind, but the single most pressing one forcefully pushed its way to her lips first. "Sarah," she said quietly, consciously keeping her voice low enough so as not to carry over to the sleeping twins, Where is Michael?" Sarah's face immediately fell at the direct mention of Michael's name, her expression clouding over with deep sorrow. She moved slowly over to the small wooden table situated in the center of the modest cabin and sank heavily into a sturdy chair, silently gesturing for Ellie to join her. Ellie carefully lowered herself into the chair directly opposite Sarah, still gratefully warming her chilled hands around the comforting mug. The cabin itself was simple but surprisingly sturdy. A single main room containing a basic kitchen area, the small bed the twins currently shared, and a worn but serviceable leather sofa. A small, efficient wood stove provided both essential heat and a rudimentary cooking surface, and rough wooden shelves lining one wall held a meager collection of essential supplies, mostly canned goods, several bottles of water, and a few basic tools. "Sarah," Ellie pressed gently but firmly. "What happened out here? Where is my son?" she asked again, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to remain calm. Sarah's eyes instantly filled with glistening tears. She stared down intently at her own untouched mug, turning it slowly, absently between her palms for a long moment before finally answering, her voice barely above a strained whisper. We had an accident," she began haltingly. "That day, the day we went hiking, we didn't check the weather forecast properly beforehand. We ended up getting caught completely unexpectedly in that terrible, sudden snowstorm 3 weeks ago. But why were you even way up here in the first place?" Ellie asked, struggling mightily to keep her own voice calm and rational. "This entire area is clearly marked as extremely dangerous on all the official park maps. Michael knows far better than to ever bring young children into this specific zone." Sarah bit her lower lip nervously. "You wanted to try something different, explore a new area? We've been hiking the same familiar trails for years now, and frankly, the girls were starting to get a little bored with them. He thought we could just explore a little ways into the less traveled areas, maybe stay primarily on the lower, presumably safer slopes." But then the storm hit us so incredibly suddenly, so violently. Going back down seemed far more dangerous at that point than pressing onward, trying to find shelter. She paused, wiping discreetly at her brimming eyes with the back of her hand. We were incredibly lucky, truly blessed, to stumble upon this cabin when we did. It literally saved our lives that first terrifying night. Ellie nodded slowly, fully understanding how finding any form of shelter in such extreme conditions would indeed have felt like a godsend. But she still didn't have the answer she desperately needed. "And Michael?" she prompted gently, her heart pounding heavily in her chest. Sarah's face completely crumpled then, and for a long, agonizing moment, she seemed utterly unable to speak. When she finally found her voice again, it was broken and choked with raw grief. The next morning, when the snow had let up just a little, Michael said he would hike out alone to try and get help. He thought if he could just reach an area with reliable cell service, or maybe find a passing park ranger. Her voice trailed off into a choked sob. I waited. Hours turned into a full day. Then another terrible storm moved in, even worse than the first one. I just couldn't possibly leave the girls all alone here to go out looking for him myself. Did you ever find him?" Ellie asked softly, her throat tightening painfully with growing dread. Sarah shook her head miserably, tears now flowing freely down her pale cheeks. "No, never. After the second storm finally passed, I tried desperately to search the nearby areas, but with the twins, I just couldn't go very far. And then more bad weather came almost immediately. We've been effectively trapped up here ever since, just waiting helplessly for the conditions to improve enough for us to even attempt making it back down to the main trails safely." Ellie's heart felt as though it was being ruthlessly squeezed in a tightening vice. "So, Michael is—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the dreadful sentence. "I don't know for certain," Sarah admitted quietly, her voice trembling, "but it's been 3 long weeks now. I've had to start accepting the probability that he—" She covered her face completely with her hands, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably with silent sobs. After a long, heavy moment of shared grief, Ellie asked the difficult question that had been nagging persistently at the back of her mind ever since she arrived at the cabin. "Do the girls know?" Sarah slowly lowered her hands, composing herself with visible, strenuous effort. "They did eventually. They're smart girls, always asking perceptive questions. By the second week, they definitely knew something was terribly wrong. I finally had to tell them the truth, that Daddy might not be coming back to us." Ellie glanced sorrowfully toward the small bed where her precious granddaughters slept on, their identical small faces appearing peaceful and innocent in the dim, flickering light of the cabin. The very thought of them having to process such devastating, life-altering news utterly broke her heart anew. "But why did you just stay here all this time?" Ellie asked, turning her focus back to Sarah, trying to understand. "It's been 3 full weeks. Surely there must have been occasional breaks in the weather, moments when you could have at least tried to make it back down the mountain." Sarah's expression grew suddenly haunted, distant. "I was terrified," she whispered hoarsely. Maybe if it had just been me alone, I might possibly have risked trying it. But with the twins, especially after already losing Michael." She shook her head vehemently, her eyes wide with fear. "I just couldn't bear the thought of something terrible happening to them too. So we stayed put, carefully using the limited supplies we found here in the cabin." Ellie rose slowly from her chair, suddenly feeling an urgent need to move, to investigate further. She walked deliberately over to the kitchen area and examined the contents of the shelves more closely this time. Most of the food items were indeed canned goods, beans, soups, various vegetables, but there were also several sealed packages of dried meat, and incongruously, cartons of milk that looked relatively fresh, certainly not expired. "These supplies," Ellie said thoughtfully, picking up one of the milk cartons, turning it over in her hand, "they don't really seem like they've just been sitting up here forgotten for years." "No," Sarah agreed readily. "I think someone definitely uses this cabin regularly. A hunter, perhaps. There's certainly enough here to last us a while longer if needed." Ellie set the milk carton back down carefully and moved towards the small trash bin located near the cabin door, intending to dispose of her empty noodle cup. As she approached the bin, something glinted unexpectedly, catching her eye, a subtle glint of metal visible just beneath a slightly loose floorboard near the wall. Crouching down slowly, she examined the area more closely, her experienced eyes missing nothing. There's something hidden under here," she murmured, mostly to herself. Sarah quickly stood up from the table and moved swiftly towards her, her expression suddenly tense. "What is it? What did you find?" Ellie carefully worked her fingertips into the narrow gap between the wooden boards and lifted. The floorboard came up surprisingly easily, revealing a small, dark, hidden space beneath. There, nestled amongst the accumulated dust and debris, lay a man's ring, a distinctive wedding band featuring a prominent diamond inlay. Ellie's breath caught sharply in her throat as she carefully lifted it out. The ring was immaculately clean, completely unmarred by the types of scratches or dirt one might reasonably expect if it had been accidentally lost beneath a cabin floor for any significant length of time. This is Michael's wedding ring," she stated flatly, her voice suddenly hollow with dawning disbelief and suspicion. Sarah stared intently at the ring for a long moment, her expression completely unreadable, before quickly reaching out for it. It must have accidentally slipped off his finger that very first night," she offered quickly, perhaps too quickly. "We were all so incredibly cold then, remember? And our hands were practically numb from the freezing temperature. It probably just fell unnoticed through the crack in the floorboards without him even realizing it was gone." Ellie reluctantly handed her the ring, watching intently as Sarah immediately slipped it on her own thumb, ostensibly for safekeeping. Something about the overly convenient explanation didn't sit quite right with Ellie, but she couldn't immediately articulate what exactly bothered her about it. She glanced slowly around the small cabin again, deliberately noting specific details she might have initially missed in her relief and exhaustion. The substantial, neatly stacked pile of chopped firewood positioned right by the door, far more than one would reasonably expect to find in a genuinely abandoned or infrequently used cabin. The wooden cabinet situated directly behind Sarah that was currently standing slightly ajar, revealing not just the expected canned goods, but also what appeared to be several items of fresh, recently purchased supplies. "Sarah," Ellie began slowly, her voice hardening slightly with suspicion. "If this cabin is truly abandoned, or only used occasionally, why is there so much prepared firewood readily available? And those supplies over there, some of them look brand new, recently stocked." A fleeting flicker of something, alarm, guilt, crossed Sarah's face almost imperceptibly before she quickly composed herself, her expression smoothing out. "Already told you. I think someone definitely uses it regularly. Maybe they've been by recently, since we've been staying here. And they didn't see you? Didn't offer any help?" Ellie pressed, incredulous. "We always hide whenever we hear anyone approaching outside," Sarah explained quickly, perhaps a little too defensively. "After everything that's happened, I just didn't know who we could possibly trust anymore." Ellie nodded slowly, accepting the explanation at face value for the moment, but the plausible explanation did little to settle the growing, profound unease churning deep within her gut. She turned back towards the kitchen area again, intending to ask more probing questions, when a sudden, swift movement caught her peripheral vision. In the split second, just before searing pain exploded violently across the back of her head, Ellie clearly saw Sarah standing directly behind her, arms raised high, the heavy butt of a hunting shotgun clutched tightly in her hands. Then, complete, utter darkness instantly claimed her consciousness. Consciousness returned slowly, painfully to Ellie in agonizing fragments. First came the intense, relentless throbbing in her head, a steady, sickening pulse of agony that radiated sharply from the base of her skull. Then, gradually, the chilling awareness of profound cold. Her extremities felt completely numb again, despite being inside the relative warmth of the cabin's interior. Finally, the smell, something acrid, sharp, and distinctly chemical that made her throat constrict involuntarily. She forced her heavy eyelids open, blinking rapidly against the overwhelming disorientation. The cabin was nearly dark now, the fire reduced to mere glowing embers that cast long, dancing, eerie shadows across the rough wooden walls. Through the grimy windows, she could see that the fierce snowstorm had finally passed, leaving behind a clear, star-filled night sky visible beyond the frosted glass panes. When she instinctively tried to move, sheer panic surged violently through her entire body. Her arms and legs wouldn't respond properly. Looking down frantically, she discovered why. She was tightly bound to a heavy wooden chair with thick rope, the bindings cinched so tightly they were already cutting painfully into her skin. The acrid smell grew noticeably stronger now, making her cough raggedly. Gas. There was gas leaking somewhere inside the sealed cabin. Ellie's gaze darted frantically around the dimly lit room, desperately searching for any sign of Sarah and the twins. The small bed tucked into the corner was completely empty now, the blankets thrown carelessly aside. No one else was present in the cabin. The horrifying realization hit her with brutal, chilling clarity. Sarah had deliberately left her here, tied securely to a chair, in a cabin rapidly filling with flammable gas, with a still smoldering fire nearby that would inevitably catch and trigger a massive, fatal explosion. Sarah fully intended for Ellie to die here. Horribly. But why? The burning question raged as fiercely within her as the searing pain in her injured head. But Ellie knew instinctively she couldn't afford to dwell on the motive right now. Survival, immediate survival, came first and foremost. She quickly took mental stock of her perilous situation. The ropes binding her wrists were indeed tight, but perhaps not expertly tied. If she could somehow create just enough slack, she might possibly be able to work her way free. The chair itself felt old, but reassuringly sturdy, not likely to break easily under normal strain. Ellie began rocking the chair methodically, starting with small, tentative movements at first, carefully testing its stability and balance. Each deliberate motion sent fresh, sickening waves of pain radiating through her injured head, but she grimly pushed through the agony, focusing solely on escape. The suffocating gas smell was definitely getting stronger, more potent by the minute. She clearly didn't have the luxury of time. With a sudden, forceful lurch, she threw all her weight sideways, intentionally toppling the heavy chair hard onto its side on the wooden floor. The jarring impact jolted her injured head violently, sending bright stars dancing across her vision momentarily. But she also felt the chair crack slightly under the strain. Encouraged by this small success, she immediately repeated the strenuous motion, slamming the damaged chair forcefully against the unforgiving floor again and again, until finally one of the sturdy wooden legs splintered audibly. The broken leg created just enough crucial give in the chair's overall structure that Ellie could now maneuver her tightly bound hands painstakingly towards her coat pocket. Her fingers, already stiff and clumsy with cold and severely restricted circulation, fumbled desperately for several agonizingly long seconds before finally closing gratefully around what she sought. The small, familiar folding knife she always carried with her for emergencies. Opening it securely one-handed while still bound proved to be an incredible challenge, requiring every last bit of dexterity and concentration she possessed under extreme duress. When the sharp blade finally clicked reassuringly into its locked position, she immediately began sawing determinately at the thick ropes encircling her wrists, being extremely careful not to accidentally cut herself deeply in the process. The noxious gas smell was now nearly overwhelming, making her head swim dizzily, her vision blurring at the edges. Somewhere nearby in the cabin, a small, flickering flame from the dying embers suddenly caught onto something flammable. There was a soft, ominous whoosh sound as fire suddenly bloomed near the main fireplace area. The thick rope around one wrist finally gave way, just as the first greedy flames began racing rapidly across the dry wooden floorboards, heading straight towards the kitchen area, where the gas concentration was likely highest. Ellie worked even faster now, frantically freeing her other wrist, and then quickly, desperately untying the ropes securing her ankles. Standing up abruptly made her feel intensely dizzy and nauseous, but pure adrenaline propelled her forward relentlessly. She stumbled haphazardly towards the main cabin door, only to find it securely locked. Whether with a physical key from the outside, or perhaps barred by some external means, she couldn't immediately tell in the dim, flickering light. The fire was spreading with terrifying rapidity now, consuming the aged, dry wood with hungry, ferocious efficiency. Grabbing one of the remaining heavy firewood logs from the pile near the door, Ellie purposefully approached the nearest window. The glass appeared old and single-paned, potentially vulnerable, especially to a determined woman who had spent decades diligently developing the considerable physical strength required for demanding wilderness survival and rescue work. With a grunt of maximum effort, she swung the heavy log forcefully against the window pane. The glass cracked loudly under the impact, but stubbornly held its form. A second, more powerful blow completely shattered it, sending sharp shards of glass flying outwards into the deep snow covering the ground outside. Ellie quickly used the end of the log to clear the remaining jagged pieces of glass from the window frame, ignoring the fresh cuts that immediately opened up on her already injured hands as she worked feverishly against the clock. Behind her, the rapidly advancing fire reached the kitchen area. There was a terrifying, heart-stopping moment when the hungry flames made direct contact with the highest concentration of the leaking gas. A sudden, violent whoosh of displaced air, and then a terrifying burst of intense, searing heat that instantly singed the hair on the back of her head and physically pushed her forward with its powerful concussive force. Ellie didn't hesitate for a single second. She immediately scrambled through the broken window opening, the sharp, jagged edges of broken glass catching unforgivingly on her clothing and cutting deeply into her leg as she maneuvered her body awkwardly through the tight, constricting space. She fell heavily, landing with a thud into the deep, soft snowdrift just outside the cabin wall, the intense cold providing a shocking, welcome contrast to the raging inferno erupting just behind her. Rolling quickly away from the burning structure for safety, she watched, horrified, as bright orange flames completely engulfed the small cabin. The warm, inviting glow that had seemed so welcoming just hours ago, now revealing itself fully as the deadly, calculated trap it had truly become. All her essential supplies, her crucial GPS device, her packed bag containing survival gear, her only means of communication and navigation, all of it was now burning furiously inside that inferno. She was completely alone again in the vast, unforgiving wilderness, without any equipment, injured, and with no clear, certain sense of her exact location relative to the distant main lodge. But she was alive, and somewhere out there, concealed by the darkness, Sarah was now on the run, taking the innocent twins with her, children who belonged to Ellie's own son, Michael, the very man Sarah had almost certainly murdered in cold blood. Ellie couldn't possibly ignore that horrifying, inescapable truth any longer. If Michael's death had genuinely been a tragic accident, as Sarah had initially claimed, then why had Sarah just tried so desperately to kill her too? The moment she started asking too many uncomfortable, probing questions, Ellie staggered painfully to her feet, wincing sharply at the shooting pain that lanced through her injured leg with a sharp window glass had cut her deeply. The night sky was clear now, the storm having completely passed, the stars shining brilliantly, incredibly visible above the dark, silhouetted tree line. She quickly oriented herself using the familiar North Star, recalling from her earlier hike that the main lodge lay generally to the west of the now burning cabin's location. But before she could even take a single step in that direction, a faint, indistinct sound suddenly caught her attention. A child's voice, sounding high-pitched and distinctly frightened, calling out plaintively from somewhere nearby in the surrounding dark forest. Completely forgetting her own significant injuries for the moment, Ellie immediately moved towards the source of the sound, her feet sinking deeply into the fresh, powdery snow with each step. The voice came again, slightly clearer this time, unmistakably belonging to one of the twins. She pushed determinately through a dense stand of tall pine trees, following the desperate cries until she finally emerged into a small, secluded clearing. There, huddled miserably against a large rock outcropping, was a small figure dressed in a familiar purple jacket, one leg extended awkwardly out at an unnatural, painful-looking angle. "Chloe," Ellie called out softly, approaching the child slowly and cautiously so as not to frighten her further in her distressed state. The little girl looked up sharply, her small face streaked with frozen tears. "Grandma Ellie, it hurts. My leg really hurts." Ellie immediately crouched down beside her injured granddaughter, carefully examining the obvious injury. Even in the dim, ambient starlight, she could clearly see that Chloe's lower leg was likely either broken or perhaps severely sprained. The ankle area was already swollen dramatically, appearing almost twice its normal size. "What happened here, sweetheart?" Ellie asked gently, already removing her own warm scarf to fashion a makeshift splint. "Where's your mom? And where's Emily?" Chloe sniffled pitifully, shivering violently from cold and shock. I fell down a steep hill back there. Mom tried to help me up at first, but then she said we had to keep going anyway." She said. The child's voice broke into a heart-wrenching sob. She said something weird about sacrifice, and then she just took Emily's hand and left me here all alone. A pure, incandescent rage, unlike anything Ellie had ever experienced before in her entire life, flooded hotly through her veins. Sarah had actually abandoned an injured child, her own daughter, completely alone in the freezing wilderness, in temperatures that surely would have killed her before morning arrived. "I'm here with you now," Ellie said firmly, working hard to keep her voice calm and reassuring for the terrified child's sake. "I'm going to get you somewhere safe and warm, I promise." With practiced, gentle movements, she expertly secured the makeshift splint tightly around Chloe's injured ankle, using sturdy fallen branches and her own scarf to effectively immobilize the joint. Then, carefully, she lifted the small child up in her arms, cradling her protectively against her chest. "It's going to be okay now," she promised sincerely, turning purposefully towards what she desperately hoped was the correct path leading back down toward civilization. "Hold on tight to me. We have a long walk ahead of us, but we'll make it together." Chloe wrapped her thin, trembling arms tightly around Ellie's neck, her small body shivering uncontrollably with intense cold and profound shock. Despite her own significant injuries and growing exhaustion, Ellie found new, previously untapped reserves of strength fueled by fierce determination as she began the incredibly arduous journey back down the dark mountain, step by painstaking step. She carried precious, vulnerable cargo now. She had absolutely no equipment, no map to guide her way, and an injured child to protect and transport safely. But she possessed decades of invaluable, hard-won experience navigating these very mountains, coupled with an ironclad determination that would absolutely not yield to pain, or fatigue, or fear. Somewhere far ahead of them, Sarah was fleeing desperately with Emily, and Ellie knew with chilling certainty that as soon as she reached safety with Chloe, she would make absolutely sure that monstrous woman never, ever harmed another member of her precious family again. The long journey back down the mountain proved to be a grueling, relentless test of raw endurance. Every single muscle in Ellie's weary body screamed desperately for rest, but she resolutely pushed onward, Chloe's surprisingly heavy weight in her arms serving as a constant, tangible reminder of exactly what was at stake. The injured child had eventually fallen into a fitful, uneasy sleep, occasional soft whimpers escaping her lips whenever a sharp jolt of pain managed to break through her exhausted state. Ellie navigated primarily by the faint starlight and her own ingrained memory of the terrain, carefully choosing the gentler, less steep slopes whenever possible, meticulously picking her way around large rocks and fallen logs she could barely discern in the pervasive darkness. Each downward step required intense concentration and careful consideration. A single misstep or fall now could potentially be catastrophic for both of them. Hours passed slowly this way, marked only by the gradual, silent movement of the distant stars across the vast, inky black sky. As the eastern horizon finally began to lighten subtly, with the very first pale hints of approaching dawn, Ellie started catching fleeting glimpses of familiar landmarks through the trees. They were definitely getting closer now, approaching the area of the maintained trails that would eventually lead them back towards the relative safety of the main lodge. "Chloe," she said softly, gently rousing the sleeping child. "Look, sweetie, look ahead. We're almost there now." The little girl stirred slowly, blinking groggily at their brightening surroundings. Her small face was still pale and drawn with pain and lingering cold, but a tiny flicker of renewed hope appeared in her tired eyes when she saw the familiar wooden trail markers just ahead. Is Mom going to be there?" she asked tentatively, her voice small and uncertain. The innocent question caught Ellie completely off guard. How could she possibly begin to explain to a traumatized 7-year-old child that her own mother had deliberately tried to kill both her and her grandmother, that she had callously abandoned Chloe alone to die in the freezing snow? I don't know for sure, honey," she answered truthfully, choosing her words carefully. "But there are definitely good people there at the lodge who can help us get warm and fix your leg properly. And that's the most important thing that matters right now, okay?" The final, exhausting stretch of their desperate journey took them slowly past the first outlying guest cabins and then directly towards the central lodge building itself. As they finally emerged wearily from the dense tree line into the main clearing, Ellie could see several early morning hikers already outside, preparing diligently for their day's adventures, and a few lodge staff members bustling about, setting up equipment near the entrance. Summoning her very last reserves of dwindling strength, she called out loudly, her voice hoarse but clear, "Help! We need help over here. Please!" Heads immediately turned in their direction. There was a brief moment of shocked, stunned stillness before people started running towards them from all directions. Ellie's legs finally gave out completely then, and she sank gratefully down to her knees in the deep snow, still instinctively cradling Chloe protectively in her arms. "Get medical assistance, quickly," someone shouted urgently, "and call the lodge manager immediately." Kind hands reached out for them, gently helping Ellie back to her trembling feet, while others carefully, expertly took Chloe from her arms. The overwhelming warmth of the lodge's main foyer enveloped them like a comforting blanket as they were carefully guided inside. Concerned voices overlapping rapidly in a confusing mixture of shock, concern, and inevitable confusion. "My God, it's Eleanor Whitaker," she heard someone exclaim nearby in disbelief. "And look, that's one of the missing children with her." The lodge manager appeared moments later, his face registering profound shock as he instantly recognized her despite her disheveled state. "Miss Whitaker, what on earth happened? How did you call the police now?" Ellie interrupted sharply, her voice raspy with utter exhaustion but firm with authority. Sarah tried to kill me. She deliberately left Chloe injured out in the snow. Left her there to die alone." A hushed, stunned silence instantly fell over the gathered crowd inside the lodge. Ellie noticed peripherally that some people had already begun recording the unfolding scene with their cell phones, but she was far beyond caring about privacy at this critical moment. "We need to get them warmed up immediately," the manager said quickly, recovering his professional composure. "And the child clearly needs urgent medical attention right away." They were gently guided over towards the large stone fireplace dominating the main room, where warm blankets miraculously appeared from somewhere, quickly wrapped around their shivering shoulders. A staff member with obvious first aid training immediately began carefully examining Chloe's badly injured leg, while another promptly brought them steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "Ms. Whitaker," the manager said quietly, crouching down beside her chair, his voice filled with concern. The gondola operators reported seeing a woman matching Sarah's description, traveling with a young child, very early this morning. They weren't absolutely certain it was her, but they thought it might possibly have been Sarah. With Emily, Ellie finished grimly for him. Which way were they heading? Down the mountain, apparently, the manager confirmed somberly. They moved incredibly quickly, didn't stop to talk to anyone at all. Ellie's heart sank heavily in her chest. If Sarah had already managed to make it all the way down the mountain via the gondola, she could potentially be anywhere by now, long gone. The distant, piercing wail of approaching sirens announced the arrival of emergency services. Within minutes, the previously quiet lodge was suddenly filled with uniformed police officers and professional paramedics bustling about efficiently. Chloe was carefully transferred onto a portable stretcher, the paramedics expertly stabilizing her injured leg and diligently checking all her vital signs. "I want to stay with my granddaughter," Ellie insisted firmly as they prepared to move Chloe towards the waiting ambulance. "Of course, ma'am," one of the paramedics readily assured her. "We'll transport you both together directly to the hospital." As they were being carefully loaded into the waiting medical helicopter, determined to be the quickest way to reach the nearest fully equipped hospital, a uniformed police officer approached Ellie purposefully. "Miss Whitaker, we'll need to take a formal statement from you as soon as possible. We've already received some conflicting information regarding this incident." "Conflicting information? What exactly do you mean?" Ellie asked sharply, not releasing her protective hold on Chloe's small hand. "A woman identifying herself as Sarah Whitaker was brought into the hospital emergency room a short while ago by a local hunter who apparently found her and a young child waiting near the park's main entrance," the officer explained carefully. "She's already made some extremely serious allegations against you personally." Ellie stared at the officer in utter disbelief, momentarily speechless. What kind of allegations?" "She claims," the officer continued, referring to his notes, "that you tracked them down somehow to a remote cabin where they had been sheltering safely ever since her husband's tragic disappearance. According to her official statement, when you learned that Michael was presumed dead, you became enraged and violently attempted to harm both her and the children." "That's absolutely absurd," Ellie exclaimed, pure anger momentarily giving her renewed energy. "She knocked me unconscious from behind. She deliberately left me tied up to die alone in a cabin rapidly filling with gas. She abandoned Chloe, her own daughter, with a broken leg out in the freezing temperatures to die." The officer nodded slowly, diligently making notes in his small notebook. "We'll certainly need formal, detailed statements from both of you, and eventually from the child as well, once she's medically stable and able." "Her name is Chloe," Ellie corrected him firmly, her protective instincts flaring, "and right now, she needs urgent medical attention far more than you need her statement." "Of course," the officer conceded readily. "We'll meet you both at the hospital shortly." He stepped back respectfully as the helicopter crew securely fastened the main doors. As the powerful helicopter lifted off smoothly, Ellie held tightly onto Chloe's small hand, watching silently as the vast, snow-covered mountain landscape rapidly fell away beneath them. In just a matter of incredibly intense hours, she had miraculously found her missing family, tragically lost her beloved son all over again, and nearly died herself at the hands of the very woman he had unfortunately married. And now, unbelievably, that same monstrous woman was actively attempting to twist the entire narrative, trying desperately to paint Ellie herself as the villain in this horrific tragedy. The sickening thought of Sarah currently holding Emily captive, potentially poisoning the innocent child's young mind against her own loving grandmother and her identical twin sister, made Ellie's blood boil uncontrollably with righteous fury. The attentive paramedic monitoring Chloe's vital signs glanced over at Ellie with noticeable concern. "Ma'am, I really need to check your own injuries properly too now. You have several deep lacerations that definitely need thorough cleaning and stitching, and likely a possible concussion from that significant blow to your head." Ellie nodded absently, numbly allowing the medic to carefully examine the painful wound hidden beneath her matted hair at the back of her skull. Her mind was already racing far ahead, anticipating what surely awaited them at the hospital. Sarah's venomous lies and manipulations, a complex legal system that would somehow have to painstakingly sort the undeniable truth from calculated fiction, and the incredibly heartbreaking, daunting task of gently helping her traumatized granddaughters eventually understand the terrible, devastating truth about what had really happened to their once happy family. Grandma Ellie. Chloe's voice was faint but suddenly clear beside her. I'm scared. Ellie leaned closer immediately, gently smoothing the child's tangled hair back from her pale forehead. I know you are, sweetheart, but I'm right here with you now, and I promise you, I'm not going anywhere ever again. It was a solemn promise she fully intended to keep, no matter what unforeseen challenges or difficulties undoubtedly lay ahead on their long road to recovery. The busy hospital corridor bustled with constant activity. Nurses moved efficiently between patient rooms. Doctors consulted charts intently. Anxious families waited nervously in designated areas for news concerning their loved ones. Ellie sat patiently on a hard plastic chair just outside the main radiology department, a fresh white bandage now covering the sutured wound on the back of her head, smaller dressings applied neatly to her cut hands. The doctors had officially confirmed she had indeed suffered a mild concussion, but thankfully no skull fracture. They strongly wanted to keep her admitted overnight for close observation, but Ellie had firmly refused to be placed on a different hospital floor from Chloe. So here she sat, waiting anxiously while her injured granddaughter underwent necessary x-rays to precisely determine the full extent of her leg injuries. A uniformed police officer stood discreetly nearby, whether primarily to protect her or perhaps simply to ensure she didn't attempt to leave. Ellie wasn't entirely sure at this point. After the helicopter landed, they had been briefly separated for initial medical assessments and triage. During that short time apart, more police officers had arrived on the scene, and the overall atmosphere surrounding the situation had grown noticeably, increasingly tense. The elevator doors at the end of the corridor suddenly slid open, and a familiar figure stepped out. Caleb Jennings, the hunter who had initially shown her the crucial camera footage. His expression appeared deeply grave as he approached her now, nodding respectfully towards the nearby police officer before addressing Ellie directly. Miss Whitaker, I heard about what happened up on a mountain after I left. I'm truly glad to see you're safe. Caleb, Ellie acknowledged quietly, studying his face intently, trying to accurately read his current intentions. Thank you for coming down, but frankly, I'm rather surprised to see you here at the hospital. He glanced nervously towards the watchful police officer, then quickly back to Ellie. I really need to talk to you, and also to the police immediately. There's something important I absolutely have to tell you both. Before she could even respond, the door to the radiology department swung open, and a doctor emerged holding a digital tablet display in his hand. Miss Whitaker, the doctor began professionally. Your granddaughter's x-rays clearly show a clean break to the tibia bone. She'll definitely require surgery soon to properly set the bone and carefully place stabilizing pins to hold it securely in position while it heals completely. When can you perform the procedure? Ellie asked immediately, rising quickly from her seat. We're preparing an operating room for her right now. We'll just need the standard consent forms signed promptly, and then we can proceed without further delay. Ellie nodded readily. I want to see her first, please. The doctor kindly guided her back into the bustling department, where Chloe now lay quietly on a portable gurney, her injured leg carefully immobilized in a temporary splint, and foreline already inserted into her small arm. The little girl's pale face brightened slightly when she saw her grandmother approaching. The doctors say they're going to fix my leg properly now, she said bravely, her voice small but hopeful. That's absolutely right, sweetheart, Ellie confirmed reassuringly, moving closer to her side and gently taking her small hand. They're going to give you some special medicine to put you completely to sleep, so you won't feel anything at all during the surgery. And when you wake up afterwards, your leg will be safely inside a strong cast, but it will finally be on the right path to healing properly. Will Mom sign the papers? Chloe asked innocently. They said they need a parent to sign them. Ellie hesitated for a moment, unsure exactly how to answer the legally complicated question. As a grandparent, she might not technically have the immediate legal authority to consent to major medical procedures, especially with Sarah, the child's mother, physically present somewhere else within the same hospital building. The attending doctor cleared his throat discreetly. In emergency situations involving minors where legal guardianship is currently unclear or contested, we are permitted to proceed with treatment that is deemed medically necessary for the child's well-being, typically with the consent of any available adult relatives. Given the highly unusual circumstances here, Miss Whitaker, your signature on the consent forms will suffice for now. A wave of profound relief washed over Ellie. Thank you, doctor. I'll sign whatever you need right away. After carefully completing all the necessary paperwork and solemnly promising Chloe she would be right there waiting for her when she woke up from the surgery, Ellie returned to the main hallway, where Caleb and the police officer were still waiting. Impatiently, "We should probably talk somewhere more private," Caleb suggested quietly, glancing around the busy corridor. The officer efficiently led them down the hall to a small, unoccupied consultation room, where two other plainclothes police officers were already waiting inside. Once the door clicked shut securely behind them, Caleb took a deep, unsteady breath. First, he began solemnly, his voice low and strained. "I just want to say again how incredibly sorry I am for absolutely everything that's happened. What I have to tell you now, it's not going to be easy to hear." Ellie steeled herself mentally, meeting his gaze directly. "Just tell us the truth, Caleb. All of it." He nodded grimly, avoiding her eyes now. 3 weeks ago, the first day they went missing, I actually found Sarah, Michael, and the twins already inside my cabin late that afternoon. They explained they had stayed the night there after getting caught unexpectedly in that first big storm. Michael explained how they had ventured too far into that remote area and simply couldn't make it back down safely once the severe weather hit suddenly. "Your cabin," Ellie interrupted sharply, clarifying, "that cabin where I found them. That's your hunting cabin?" "Yes," Caleb confirmed reluctantly. "I've owned it privately for many years now. It's not shown on any of the official park maps. I built it myself years ago on a remote parcel of land I own up there." Caleb continued his difficult confession, his voice barely audible now. "I initially let them stay there, of course, primarily because the little girls were clearly exhausted and terribly frightened by the storm. Michael sincerely promised they would leave as soon as things improved slightly and the girls felt better rested." Caleb paused again, visibly struggling with his next words, his face contorted with guilt. "I left them there alone, intending to return back down to the main lodge myself for privacy. But then the weather worsened again dramatically. A sudden, violent hailstorm moved in rapidly. I was already about halfway back down a mountain trail when I suddenly heard screaming, distinctly children's voices, terrified. The small consultation room had gone completely, utterly still now, all eyes fixed intently on Caleb as he forced himself painfully to continue his account. I immediately followed the sounds back up the trail, and that's when I saw Sarah deliberately push Michael forcefully off the edge of that high cliff. Ellie's hand flew instinctively to her mouth, a strangled, horrified sound escaping her throat despite her efforts to remain composed. She had suspected something terrible like this might have happened, but hearing it confirmed so starkly, so brutally, was utterly devastating. "Why didn't you report this heinous crime immediately?" one of the detectives demanded sharply, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. Caleb's broad shoulders slumped defeatedly. "Sarah, she saw me watching from the trees. I wanted desperately to confront her right then and there, but with the worsening weather conditions and the dangerously unstable cliff edge nearby. Frankly, I was afraid. Afraid for my own safety, and also terrified for the children's safety if I intervened directly. So we all just went back to the cabin together in silence. And that's when," Caleb continued, his voice thick with shame, "that's when she made me an offer. If I agreed to let her and the kids stay hidden safely up there in my cabin until someone else naturally found them later, pretending Michael had simply died in an accident, she promised she'd pay me enough money to comfortably retire and completely disappear afterwards. said she'd easily get the substantial sum from Michael's life insurance policy payout. He couldn't bring himself to meet Ellie's piercing gaze as he continued his confession. I'm deeply ashamed now to admit it, but I actually considered her offer seriously. I even initially agreed to help her conceal the truth. For the past 3 weeks, I've been secretly bringing them essential supplies up there, food, firewood, whatever else they needed. $2 million, Ellie stated flatly, her voice chillingly quiet now. That was the total value of Michael's life insurance policy. Sarah is listed as the primary beneficiary, but only if Michael died while they were still legally married, and crucially, with no criminal charges or proven malicious intent involved in his death. Caleb nodded miserably. Sarah mentioned that her husband had recently consulted with a lawyer about potentially changing his will, specifically about creating secure trust funds directly for the twins in the event of his death, or in case of a possible divorce. But apparently, the necessary legal paperwork hadn't been finalized yet before his death. One of the detectives leaned forward intently across the small table. So what changed your mind, Mr. Jennings? Why are you suddenly coming forward with this information now? Why did you ultimately decide to help Mrs. Whitaker find her granddaughter? Several contributing factors, really, Caleb answered honestly. Seeing all those missing person posters plastered everywhere around town, constantly watching how terribly the little girls were grieving for their lost father, it all really started wearing heavily on my conscience over time. But what truly decided it for me, finally, was overhearing Sarah talking secretly on a satellite phone she had hidden, presumably talking with her lawyer. She was actively planning to somehow implicate me in Michael's death, probably as a way to avoid having to share any of the insurance money with me later on. That's the precise moment when I knew for certain I couldn't possibly be a part of her evil scheme any longer. He turned then to face Ellie directly, genuine remorse etched deeply into his weathered features. I am so incredibly sorry, Miss Whitaker. Truly sorry I didn't lead you directly to them immediately when you first showed me that poster yesterday. I was just scared and selfish. But then, when I saw Sarah leaving the mountain alone early this morning, accompanied by only one child, I instantly knew something else must have gone terribly wrong up there. That's when I immediately called the police myself and told them everything I knew. Ellie stared at him intently, a complex, tumultuous mix of conflicting emotions churning wildly within her, profound gratitude that he had ultimately helped save Chloe's life, burning fury that he had knowingly protected Sarah and concealed the truth for so long, utter disgust at his initial willingness to potentially profit financially from her own son's brutal murder. She murdered my son, Ellie stated flatly, her voice barely above a ragged whisper now, and you actively helped her cover it up afterwards. I know I did, Caleb acknowledged quietly, his head bowed low in shame, and I'll fully accept whatever punishment ultimately comes my way for my part in this. I just couldn't live with myself anymore, knowing the full truth. One of the detectives stood up decisively. Mr. Jennings, we're officially placing you under arrest at this time as an accessory after the fact to homicide. You have the right to remain silent. As the officer continued methodically reading Caleb his Miranda rights, Ellie tried desperately to process everything she had just learned. Michael hadn't died tragically in an unfortunate accident while bravely trying to save his family, as she had initially hoped. He had been callously, brutally murdered by his own wife in cold blood, with his innocent young children nearby, forced to witness the horrific act. The officers carefully handcuffed Caleb and prepared to lead him out of the small room. Before they left, he turned back to face Ellie one last time. For what it's worth, Miss Whitaker, I truly am deeply sorry for everything. Without me finally coming forward today, you might possibly never have found your granddaughter Chloe alive. I sincerely hope that someday, you might possibly find it in your heart to forgive me. Ellie raised her hand slightly for a tense moment, looking as though she might actually strike him in her grief and anger, but then her arm dropped heavily back down to her side. You're right about one thing, Caleb, she conceded reluctantly, her voice strained. Without your eventual help, I might indeed never have found Chloe or Emily alive again. And for that alone, I do sincerely thank you. But forgiveness? That's something I simply cannot offer you right now. Maybe not ever. After Caleb was escorted away under arrest, the remaining lead detective explained the next immediate steps to Ellie. We're moving to formally arrest Ms. Sarah Whitaker right now. With Mr. Jennings's detailed testimony, combined with what we fully expect to learn eventually from the children's accounts, we now have more than enough probable cause to officially charge her with first-degree murder and multiple counts of attempted murder. What about Emily? Ellie asked urgently, her primary concern shifting back to her other granddaughter. Where is she right now? Is she safe? She's currently in a secure, designated room nearby with a trained child advocate specialist, the detective assured her calmly. Sarah has been kept completely separate from her ever since we first became aware of the conflicting accounts earlier today. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse poked her head into the room, looking directly at Ellie. Miss Whitaker, your granddaughter Chloe is out of surgery now. Everything went very well, and she's currently resting comfortably in the recovery area. You can see her again very soon. Thank you, Ellie said, profound relief evident in her weary voice. At least one small thing was finally going right today. The detective stood up. I need to join my colleagues now. We're proceeding directly to Sarah Whitaker's hospital room now to formally arrest her and read her rights. Would you possibly like to be present when we do so? Ellie considered the offer for a brief moment, then nodded decisively. Yes, I absolutely need to look her directly in the eye when it happens. They walked together in silence down the long hospital corridor towards another wing of the building. Outside a specific hospital room, guarded conspicuously by a uniformed police officer, several other police officials were already gathered, speaking together in low, serious tones. They acknowledged Ellie with respectful nods as she and the detective approached them. We're ready to proceed, the lead detective stated firmly. Miss Whitaker, you can certainly observe the proceedings, but please allow us to handle the official process ourselves. Ellie agreed silently, and together they entered the designated room. Sarah lay propped up slightly in the hospital bed, and 4 lines still attached to her arm, various monitors tracking her vital signs beside the bed. Her expression immediately hardened into a cold mask when she saw Ellie enter the room behind the detectives. Sarah Whitaker, the lead detective began formally, his voice loud and clear. You are hereby placed under arrest for the murder of Michael Whitaker and for the attempted murders of Eleanor Whitaker and Chloe Whitaker. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective continued methodically reading Sarah her full Miranda rights, Ellie simply watched the woman who had so callously killed her only son. Sarah's face remained completely impassive, betraying no emotion whatsoever, until the detective specifically mentioned Caleb Jennings's detailed testimony against her. He's lying. Sarah spat out venomously, her composure finally cracking. Caleb was the one who actually— Save it for your lawyer, Ms. Whitaker, the detective interrupted sternly, continuing unflustered with the reading of her rights. When he had finally finished the formal procedure, Ellie stepped forward purposefully, unable to remain silent any longer. Why, Sarah? Just tell me why. Michael was always a good, faithful husband to you. Sarah's expression twisted grotesquely with raw bitterness and resentment. Good? Is that honestly what you still think? We had been arguing constantly for months, ever since I caught him cheating on me red-handed with some woman from his office downtown. Michael would never cheat, Ellie stated firmly, her voice filled with unwavering conviction. That's simply not who he was. You know that. I saw him myself, meeting up secretly with different women multiple times. Sarah insisted vehemently, always using that supposed friend of his as a cover. Always the same lame excuse about networking or important business meetings. And then, suspiciously, he suddenly started talking seriously about wanting to change our prenuptial agreement. He was obviously planning to leave me eventually, probably for someone else younger. Ellie shook her head sadly, pity mixing with her anger now. You clearly don't know the full story, Sarah. You just immediately assumed the absolute worst possible scenario and then acted rashly, violently, based on your unfounded suspicions. That final hiking trip, it was supposed to be our chance to fix things between us, Sarah continued defensively, seemingly as if Ellie hadn't spoken at all, lost in her own distorted narrative. A way for us to try and reconnect properly as a family again. But he just kept denying everything, stubbornly refusing to cut ties completely with that female friend of his. I guess I just finally snapped. So you just push him off a cliff? Ellie asked incredulously, the sheer brutality of the act still difficult to fully comprehend, with your own innocent daughters standing nearby, witnessing the horror. They weren't supposed to follow us outside the cabin. Sarah protested weakly, defensively. I specifically told them both to stay inside where it was safe. One of the nearby officers stepped forward then and efficiently placed handcuffs securely on Sarah's wrists, carefully securing them to the metal bed rail. Miss Whitaker, you'll remain in official police custody here at the hospital until you are medically cleared for safe transport directly to the county detention center, the officer informed her formally. Sarah glared hatefully across the room directly at Ellie. This isn't over yet, she hissed menacingly. Oh, it was over the very moment you consciously decided to murder my son in cold blood, Ellie replied coldly, her voice devoid of all emotion now. You'll likely spend the rest of your miserable life rotting away in prison for what you've done, and you will never see those precious girls again. I'll make absolutely certain of that. Leaving Sarah under secure police guard in her hospital room, Ellie made her way slowly back towards the designated recovery area, where Chloe was gradually beginning to wake up fully from the anesthesia administered during her surgery. The child's injured leg was now encased securely in a bright pink cast extending from her foot up to her mid-thigh, elevated slightly on a soft pillow to help reduce swelling. Grandma Ellie, Chloe murmured groggily as Ellie quietly took a seat in the chair beside her bed. I'm right here, sweetheart, Ellie assured her gently, tenderly taking her small hand in hers. The surgery went perfectly, just like the doctors promised. You're going to be just fine now, really. Where's Emily? The little girl asked anxiously, looking around the unfamiliar room blurrily. She's here too, safe in the hospital nearby. You'll get to see her again very soon, I promise. Later that same evening, after Chloe had been successfully moved to a regular pediatric room and had finally fallen into a deep, medication-assisted sleep, Ellie was granted official permission to visit Emily. The other twin was situated in a quiet room just down the hall, accompanied by a kind-faced social worker sitting quietly in a corner chair reading a magazine. Emily looked up hesitantly as Ellie entered the room softly, her large eyes wide and filled with palpable uncertainty. She resembled her twin sister Chloe so incredibly closely in appearance, yet the terrifying experiences of the past few weeks had clearly marked her differently. There was a profound weariness evident in her young gaze that no innocent 7-year-old child should ever possess. Hi, Emily, Ellie said softly, approaching the bed slowly and cautiously. Grandma Ellie? The little girl's voice trembled noticeably. Where's Mom? Where's Chloe? Ellie sat down carefully on the edge of the hospital bed, taking care not to crowd the obviously frightened child. Chloe is resting peacefully in another room nearby right now. Her leg was hurt badly, but the nice doctors here already fixed it all up, so she's going to be perfectly okay soon. And Mom, Ellie paused, choosing her next words with extreme care. Your mom is currently staying with some other people right now, people who are trying very hard to understand everything that happened up there on the mountain recently. For right now, both you and Chloe are going to come stay safely with me for a while. Emily's lower lip began to quiver uncontrollably. Daddy's not ever coming back, is he? She whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Mommy said he had a bad accident up there. Ellie felt her already broken heart shattering all over again at the child's innocent pain. No, sweetheart, she confirmed gently but honestly, Daddy isn't coming back to us. But please always remember, he loved you and Chloe both very, very much. And I'm going to make absolutely sure that you always remember that wonderful love. Tears instantly welled up in Emily's large, expressive eyes. Without any warning, she suddenly launched herself forward into Ellie's waiting arms, racking sobs, shaking her small frame violently. Ellie held her granddaughter tightly, protectively, her own silent tears falling freely now as she gently rocked the distraught child back and forth, murmuring soft words of comfort. As Emily's heartbroken sobs gradually subsided into soft hiccups, and then eventually into the even, rhythmic breathing of complete, exhausted sleep, Ellie continued to hold her close, thinking somberly of all that had tragically happened and all the difficult challenges that undoubtedly still lay ahead for their fractured family. She had lost her only son, a deep, gaping wound that she knew would likely never fully heal within her lifetime. But his precious daughters remained, two beautiful, living links to the wonderful man she had lovingly raised and cherished throughout his life. They would desperately need all her strength, resilience, and wisdom now, more than ever before, and she was absolutely determined to provide it for them, unstintingly. Justice for Michael would eventually come, albeit slowly, through the complex court system. Sarah would inevitably face trial for her heinous crimes, and Caleb would certainly have to answer legally for his complicit role in concealing the terrible truth for so long. But the true, meaningful justice, Ellie firmly believed, would ultimately come in ensuring that both Emily and Chloe grew up knowing, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were deeply loved, cherished, and fiercely protected, that despite the horrific, unforgivable actions of one parent, they were absolutely not defined by that dark, tragic legacy. As the soft moonlight filtered gently through the hospital window, casting pale, ethereal shadows across Emily's peacefully sleeping face, Ellie made a silent, solemn promise to her lost son. She would diligently care for his beloved daughters with every single ounce of love, patience, and wisdom she possessed. She would help them carefully navigate the difficult, painful truths of their traumatic past, while simultaneously building a hopeful future filled with genuine healing, enduring love, and lasting hope. Eleanor Whitaker had never shied away from tackling challenging trails in her long life. She had spent a lifetime preparing herself, both physically and mentally, for difficult, arduous journeys. In this particular journey, perhaps the single most important, most challenging one of all, will be faced with the exact same unwavering resilience, quiet strength, and fierce determination that had successfully guided her through the formidable mountains she loved for more than 3 remarkable decades. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more content like this.